I got to the phone just in time. Trying to unlock it with wet fingers is not the most pleasant experience, and I managed to do it before it turned off. Sorry, honey, I was in the shower. About. I thought you'd save yourself for me when I got home tomorrow night. Who do you shower with? My pulse jumped for a millisecond until his mouth quickly turned into a beautiful smile that told me he loved me. Stupid, I was in the shower. You called 5 minutes earlier. I'm still lathered up and have conditioner in my hair. He let out his sexy chuckle, his teeth flashing white as he slowly shook his head. We have a small problem, so everyone is busy on the platform. I need to fill in, so I'm calling. Earlier. His smile faded. Why did he pause in his sentence? This alarmed me. He regained his composure and his smile returned, at least partially. I suddenly wondered if he had seen something here that might give him away. Jimmy, are you okay? You look like something suddenly occurred to you. Sorry, Jade, something important happened. I need to go. Weather permitting, the helicopter should be here in the morning. These 3 weeks seem to be getting longer, and the 2 weeks you spend at home seem short. I really want you to come back to our house. Just tell Jade, and I'll give it all up. Money doesn't matter, but we matter. I've been saying all these 5 years. If you want me to get a job on land and not on these gas platforms in the North Sea, don't be afraid to ask for what you want. This job means a lot to you, plus the salary is exorbitant. I love you, Jimmy, and I promise we'll make up for the 3 weeks of missed fun. I love you, Jimmy. I'm serious, Jade. I'd rather find a job in a supermarket than lose what we have. I loved you, Jade. Excuse me, I have to go. I felt uneasy, as if he had said, loved me, not love. I must have become paranoid. But something was bothering him, as if something happened during the video call that made him change. I looked around. There was nothing there that would give me away. I was so careful to cover my tracks and make sure everything looked normal. My special time was carefully planned so as not to arouse suspicion. I went on dates with girls on Friday nights and was a good wife, never dancing with any of the men who were always hitting on us at the club. I took a taxi back with Jimmy's sister Beth, who dropped me off first, and then I rang the doorbell, knowing that his security camera was signaling to him that I was home. I stood up, shrugged my coat off my shoulders, and kissed him on the doorbell camera, knowing he would look at it later. I never gave him, or anyone else, the slightest reason to doubt that I was anything more than a faithful wife who spent one evening a week with her girlfriends, while my husband braved the dangers of the North Sea to support our fantastic life. I took a new set of electric blue underwear off the hook on the bedroom door. Still in the package, it was mounted on a cardboard 2D torso piece, showing how it all attaches to each other. It was for Dan. Our dates were quick. For the past 18 months, everything had been the same. Jimmy left for work on Fridays. I got ready and went to the club at least an hour earlier than the other girls. Once the taxi dropped me off at the club, I entered through the back service entrance, and I walked to Dan's office. We had sex. There was no love in our relationship, just release for both of us. And then I went out the back door and was walking to the front of the club to join her not-so-bright friends, including her sister-in-law. They all thought that I had just arrived, not suspecting that I had already been above them for at least an hour. Everything was repeated in the same format as every Friday. Some wine, a few cocktails, lots of talking, laughing. We danced together, and some danced with random male partners. But not with me. I always refused them, and when they were a little more persistent, I raised my hand and shook my wedding ring. But this was a secondary reason. Early on, Dan told me that if I ever danced in a club with another man, I could forget about showing up early to his club. I needed the sensations that he gave me, something that I could not and did not want to ask my husband for, so I tried to fulfill his request. After a fun night, I was driving home with Beth, my sister-in-law, giggling and chatting. After she dropped me off, I walked up to the entrance and rang the doorbell. Looking at him, I leaned forward and kissed the air, telling Jimmy I missed him before opening the door and entering. At some point during the night, he saw this and sent me a little kiss emoji on WhatsApp. When I woke up in the morning, I saw that he had written me a message, but it was not quite what I expected. It simply said that there were problems and he was delayed, but would be home on Monday. I started to worry. Does he really know something? But how? He had never been to a club, so there was no way he could have installed a camera there. Dan advised me to always linger and look in my purse for a few minutes before entering the club, but also look around. Did the car drive into the parking lot after the taxi? Are there any cars in the parking lot from which someone is watching me? If for any reason I felt like I was being followed, I was to enter the club through the front door. Of course, I didn't miss anything, did I? I chalked it up to problems with the drilling rig. This had happened before, but I felt uneasy. Mid-morning, I received a text from Beth on my phone. Jimmy texted her saying he wouldn't be back in time and asked if she'd take me shopping on Sunday. Her husband Stan was playing golf that day, so we took the train to London and did just that. I was relieved that he was coming home the next evening, but was sad when I received a text in the middle of the day saying he wouldn't be home until Tuesday. There was not a single emoticon in the message, just text, which was not typical for our communication these days. I immediately replied to the message with a sad face, a kiss, and a couple of hearts, and waited. There was no response. I called him, but the call went straight to voicemail. A few minutes later, Beth's phone screeched, indicating the arrival of a message. When she read it, I was sure her eyes rolled back at me for a moment before she typed a reply and put the phone back in her purse. She looked at me and smiled, but somehow it wasn't right. They can't know, I'm covering my tracks, and there's simply no evidence. But I still felt uneasy. I asked her if there was anything important. She literally looked me straight in the eyes. It was Stan. Apparently one of his friends just found out that his wife was cheating on him. It seemed to me that my heart jumped to my throat. It seemed like she was looking straight into my soul. "Oh, this is terrible. Do we know them?" She still looked into my soul and answered, "Yes, we both know him, but not her. She is a stranger to us." I felt uneasy. I wanted to ask something else, but I thought it best to remain silent. On Monday and Tuesday, I cleaned the house again. My new stained underwear was now clean and dry and joined the large collection I had amassed over the past 18 months. I started to think that now it would be wise to sort it out and get rid of some things, but the idea hurt me because none of it was cheap and it wasn't meant for my husband. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I should start using some of this before he gets home. He said he should be home around 4:30, so I headed to the gym at 12 to try to calm my mind before he arrived. After the first time I slept with Dan, I was sure I had the word guilty tattooed on my face, even though I did my best to act natural when Jimmy came home. But Jimmy didn't say anything. This tattoo of my shameful act was simply not visible to him. Having realized this, I realized that I would be safe if I followed simple rules. Behave normally, do not try to compensate, do not refuse my husband, and my affair did not take place anywhere except Dan's office during those girlish evenings. When I returned from the gym, I was shocked. Jimmy had already returned and was sitting on the terrace, looking across the garden to Knisborough Castle in the distance. I went outside to listen to the light rustling of the trees and the singing of birds. Jimmy sat there, not getting up to hug me. He just turned his face towards me with a blank expression and went back to looking at the garden. I felt my heart beat faster and a terrible knot formed in my stomach. "How long, Jade?" I didn't expect such a question and tried to think quickly. There was nothing that gave me away or had a rational explanation. "Jimmy, what are you saying? What are you implying that I'm having an affair?" He turned and looked at me, his face expressionless. I've seen this before when we would sometimes meet up with friends and family for the evening. The guys would play poker and us girls would drink and chat. I looked at his best poker face. The silence continued and I felt a tear slip from my eye. "Jimmy, I didn't do anything." He stood up and picked up the box I hadn't noticed was next to him, then dumped its contents onto the table. 18 months of worn underwear lay in a heap. He sat back down, turned and looked at me with an expressionless face. I wanted to curse, but that would give me away. I needed to play his game. "You put 2 and 2 together and you get 5. I missed you, it's not what it seems. I feel lonely when you're not around, so I started buying lingerie and loved looking at myself in the mirror, wanting to make sure I still looked sexy and making sure you still wanted me. I felt embarrassed by how much I had bought, so I stuffed it in a box in the closet. I thought you would be angry with me for spending so much money. You're wrong, Jade. I don't care how much you spent to show me how beautiful you are. But I'm not the one benefiting from what, in my opinion, is now a tawdry pile of junk that you soiled. He sat down on another chair and took out a large manila envelope. There was a slight bulge on it, which meant it was not empty. He put it in front of him, then looked at me with the same face and said, "Nothing." I looked at the envelope and was overcome with fear. What did he receive and how did he know? I needed a hint to at least try to limit the possible damage. His sister's comment about her husband's friend led me to believe that she was referring to my marriage. When she said we didn't know this woman, she meant the other me, the one who broke her wedding vows. I had some problems. What's in the envelope, honey? It's true, Jade, it's just true. Then you have to show me what's there. I have nothing to hide. If you think I did something wrong, something that came between us, you're wrong. It will be a simple misunderstanding, trust me. He leaned over the table and began to sort through the things scattered on it, as if putting on a little show. Then he found the blue underwear I wore on Friday. Did he like to see you in it on Friday? I jumped up from my chair, leaned over the balustrade separating the deck from the garden, and exhaled dryly for several moments. Now I was shaking violently, and tears were flowing from my eyes. I racked my brains, wondering how he could have known about this. As I stood there, contemplating, his voice brought me back to that moment, saying 3 words that no partner in a relationship wants to hear. We need to talk. I looked at him, and he nodded towards the chair opposite him. I sat up and looked at his face. There were no emotions on him, just the same poker face that he had a few minutes ago when I returned home and my world began to crumble with every second. Jade, look at me, okay? This is what will happen. I will give you this envelope so that you have a copy of all the evidence of your infidelity, and you will only have one chance. I want you to tell me the whole truth from the very beginning, when this began. I didn't do anything. Jimmy, please, please believe me. I completely broke down and sobbed, barely breathing. Whenever I looked at him, he would sit and look at me, impassive and emotionless. Jade, I know this is hard for you. Let me explain everything to you. I want to hear it from you, your words from your mouth. I won't move from this chair, and I promise I won't touch you, okay? But you have one chance, Jade. If you want to continue to act out, then I will make sure that all family members, friends, former work colleagues, neighbors, and even the couple who run the pub know about the contents of this envelope. Take your time. I hope that if you start from the beginning, leave no stone unturned, I can understand why and try to find a path to forgiveness. So, on June 20, 2022, you, Jade Thomas, will tell your husband, Jimmy Thomas, the truth about your infidelity without fear of violence or anger towards yourself. As they say, the word is yours. I felt tears flow from my eyes. He was so calm and collected. Obviously, he knew, although I couldn't understand how. The threat of being crushed by the contents of his envelope made me decide that I had to tell the whole truth, the whole dirty truth, and hope that eventually he would forgive me so we could pick up the pieces. I started crying uncontrollably and could not move. He obviously foresaw that I would struggle and poured a glass of ice water from a jug which he placed on the table. He returned to the kitchen and grabbed a box of tissues. Sorry, Jade, I knew you would need water, but I didn't think it would hit you so hard. Here, have some napkins. When you're ready, shoot. I tried to dry my eyes as best I could, but I couldn't look directly at him, so I focused on the glass of water in front of me before speaking. First of all, Jimmy, I'm sorry I did this, and I'm sorry that you found out and it hurt you. I wasn't actively looking for someone, it just happened. It resulted in the perfect storm of shit in my life when you weren't there to help me. I heard him take a deep breath and looked up to see his gaze harden as he exhaled through his nose. I understood why. Sorry, Jimmy, I didn't mean to offend you. I was just stating a fact. I was alone and everything was going wrong. The first blow came when I was made redundant. We had no idea COVID was going to stop the world. If I had known, I wouldn't have jumped ship to ship into a fledgling business. If everything was normal, I would still work there, but as you say, things happen. Then there was COVID itself. Yes, the whole blockade was over, but it was so hard for me to be alone, especially without real neighbors. Until you came home, I felt like a real prisoner, a bird in a gilded cage that we call home. And everything slowly returned to normal. When everything returned to normal, many girls could not go out for various reasons, so life was very low-key until this happened. It was the week when I had a punctured car, and I was on my way to an interview in Sheffield, and they basically said on the phone that the job was mine, but of course I never showed up for the interview, and they gave the job to someone else. And the next day, the washing machine suddenly broke down, although it was only 3 months old. On Friday, we went for a walk, and the girls commented that I looked depressed, which of course I was. When we left and were almost home, I realized that I had left my phone. Beth called, and the club owner answered. The phone was given to the manager, and I could pick it up whenever I wanted. It was my only way to stay close to you when you were at work, so the tax-imported Beth went home, and I went back to the club to pick up the phone. They directed me upstairs to the office of Dan, the owner of the club. I knocked and walked in, and he was sitting at his desk. He stood up and came over with my phone, and I began to apologize for leaving it. As he extended his hand to hand it to me, I smelled his aftershave. It was your and my favorite obsession. It made me think of you, and I burst into tears, hugging his shoulders and sobbing heavily. He let me cry. I needed it right there at that very moment, and for the first time in my entire life with you, I allowed my emotional barrier to crumble. I realized what I was talking about. It hurt. I stopped and looked at Jimmy. He sat again with an emotionless expression on his face. So we have a plausible reason why you fell off your pedestal that time. But it went on, Jade, until last Friday. Why did he blackmail you? Had some kind of power over you that forced you to return? I need to understand why. Now it was quite clear that he knew almost everything. One way or another, he should have been warned or he had suspicions. I had to assume that the envelope came from a private detective, but I didn't know how far it went. I can tell you why, but it will hurt you, Jimmy. Are you sure? He made a small, expressionless nod to continue, and I continued from that moment in Dan's office that I described. I looked at Jimmy, he closed his eyes, and a single tear rolled down his empty face. I began to cry heavily, repeating words of regret over and over until I was practically hyperventilating. Was he better, Jade? Is that why you kept coming back? I guess you love it if you buy and share all this lingerie that I don't remember seeing you wear. I jumped out of my chair and tried to move towards him to hug him, but Jimmy calmly raised his hand and stopped me, telling me to sit down and finish telling the truth. I was a broken woman, and I was sure that my husband was broken too behind the facade he put up. He wasn't better, but he was different, very different. I love you, Jimmy. I fought to hold back my tears. I was serious. I jumped out of my chair again, but this time I pushed past his arm and pressed myself against him as my tears spilled onto his shirt. Usually his hands reached out to me to comfort me, but today they lay motionless, leaning on the arms of the chair. He said quietly, "Please, Jade, sit back down. This is the hardest part of the rest of our lives. Let's get through this. I have a few questions, Jade, if you don't mind." "How often, Jade?" "Every Friday when you worked, I met with the girls." "Did you dress for him?" "Yes." It was becoming more and more difficult for me to control myself. I wasn't even sure that he understood my words through the constant sobs. I wanted it to stop. Each question was like a knife stabbing deeper into my heart. I was overcome with shame, and he saw it. So he told me to drink water and calm down as much as possible. A few minutes later, I sat, trembling, but quite sane. He said a few more questions, and he would stop. "You liked the sex, Jade. You came back to it again and again, so it had to be better than the one we had. I told you, he's just not like you. It's wrong, but I can't help it." I again could not hold back the abundant flow of tears, and felt that I was going to lose consciousness. Jade, last question. I nodded. Do you love him more than me? That's all. It brought me to the limit. I was suffocating until I lost consciousness. When I came to my senses, he picked me up in his arms and laid me on the sofa in the room. On the armrest of the sofa lay that terrible manila envelope. I'm sorry, Jade, but we have to get this over with. Can you answer the last question? No, I don't love him at all. I don't know why or what kept me coming back to it. I knew about the consequences, but I couldn't stop, although I told myself for days that it needed to stop. What will happen now? Jimmy, please, I beg you, don't leave me. We can solve this together. There must be some way out. Jade, thank you. We will finish this part of the conversation. Now you can pick up your copy, which is in the envelope. I sat down and took the envelope with trembling hands, surprised at how light it was. When I opened it, there was only one item inside. Small digital voice recorder. If you press the little button on the left, Jade, it will stop the recording. I did this and examined the device. It left me confused, and my mind began to rearrange its thoughts. He had nothing but this little device I was holding in my hands, but of course he knew, and that was the problem. My husband knew. I just admitted that I betrayed him in the worst possible way. I thought about crushing it to destroy the evidence, but the real evidence was now part of our memories, so what was the point of destroying it? Jimmy, this is pointless. You knew. You should have known. You couldn't have chosen this underwear by chance, could you? When did you find out? When I looked at him, his poker face disappeared. He won and I lost. Tears flowed from his devastated eyes, and deep loss was written on his face. I would never be able to get rid of the image of my husband sitting at that very moment for the rest of my life, and at the moment I wished it would be short. He spoke, his voice now barely recognizable. I found out about it on Friday, but I wasn't 100% sure. I needed you to tell me for sure. When you came out of the shower to talk to me, I suddenly noticed that there were brand new underwear hanging on the door hook. It was just a reflection in the mirrored closet, but I saw it. You always hang your clothes there when you get ready. It was in the package, and I wanted it to still be in the package when I got home, but we both knew it wasn't. I watched the doorbell footage of you leaving Friday night, noted the time, and carefully paused the video to see a piece of underwear when you turned and kissed the camera. When you came back and did the same, you stood right in front of the camera a little longer, long enough to see that you were wearing a different bra, so you changed. When you left, I called my sister so she could note what time you showed up at the club. It was almost 2 o'clock, which means 90 minutes of your time remained unaccounted for. Thank you for telling me what you did for those 90 minutes. Until this moment, I was in the dark. I was shaking, but I had to ask a question. What now, Jimmy? Can you forgive me? Can we find a way forward? He looked at me with tears streaming from his eyes. I forgive you. I didn't let him finish. I jumped up and threw myself on his neck, kissing him on the cheek. He didn't react at all. His expression was blank again, and the tears were still falling. I pulled away from him. I forgive you, Jade. For the first time this happened, I can understand your pressure. I already knew that you were not in the best state of mind during and after COVID. I spoke to my sister. She has a friend whose wife was a nurse and died during COVID, a decent, attractive guy. Honestly, I was thinking about inviting you to arrange indiscreet meetings if it gets you out of a dark place. As for all the other cases when you cheated on me, I cannot forgive them, and I cannot turn a blind eye to them. I wanted to cry, but I had to take advantage of the little opportunity he gave me. Wait, Jimmy, would you let me sleep with someone? Who cares if you're actually offering more than I did? When I was with Dan, I had just sex, and yet you imply that someone could do the same thing to me that you and I did. He walked across the room and picked up a vase, my vase. Jimmy, please don't. You know what this vase means to me. I know, Jade. I don't plan to do anything other than look at her. I remember how proud you were of it at school when you made it. I remember how it was displayed in the graduating class, showing that there were talented people in the school. We both fell in love with her. I'm not going to, but suppose I throw it against the wall so that it breaks into 1,000 pieces. Let's say we spent a year searching for every tiny fragment until we were sure we had all the pieces, and then carefully glued everything back together. Do you still want to put it in a prominent place in our home? Will she be the same? On the other hand, if we both agreed to lend it to someone who would appreciate it, would he return it safe and sound? I knew where this conversation would lead, but I needed to continue. I could barely whisper the answer. No, Jimmy, it will be noticeable that it was glued together. It will look similar, but it will not be the same. But if we lent it to someone, they would take care of it and return it safe and sound. By that time I had broken down and was sobbing uncontrollably. I understood what was going on. Our marriage was the equivalent of that vase, broken into all these pieces. Jimmy will perceive it after repair, only as a fixed vase. The vase will never be the same, and neither will our marriage. If we had borrowed her, and by this he meant agreeing to have some kind of relationship with someone else while he was away, then most likely our marriage would also remain intact. So what now? I've already packed a couple of suitcases and talked to my sister about staying with her. You're staying here, you've been a brilliant realtor, so go ahead and sell this house, unless you don't want it and can't pay the mortgage to keep it. I want to be honest, we don't have kids, so it's $5,050 or so. Until I leave, are you satisfied with this arrangement? I wanted to scream and yell that it wasn't fair, that I didn't want him to leave, but I knew my husband. He will never see our marriage in the same light, and it will fall apart. I didn't cry, I held back, but tears ran down my cheeks like two mini rivers. He went upstairs and came down with 2 suitcases. He came over, and when the sobs started again, he hugged me tightly, and I realized that my husband would never hug me like that again. I could barely speak. If I could damn myself to hell for an eternity to keep you, I would, but I know I can't. If it means anything, I'm truly sorry for what I did. These things happen. Watching you for the last hour was punishment enough in my eyes. But you lost something that was dear to both of us. I pray that you can come to terms with that. Then he left, and I sat on the floor with the front door open and watched his car drive away from the house and, most likely, never return. In April 2024, I held my goddaughter, Amy, in my arms and dedicated my life to her. She was so tiny and helpless, and I was grateful for this opportunity. After Jimmy left me, I didn't know that he had tendered his resignation from his job. I later learned that he was planning to find some local work if his suspicions turned out to be unfounded. Otherwise, he was planning to go abroad. As a result, after he left me, 4 weeks later, he ended up in the USA. When I found out, I couldn't handle it, but Jimmy asked his sister Beth to use my circle of friends to rally around me, and they managed to keep me afloat. The house sold fairly quickly, and up until that point, Jimmy continued to pay the bills, and even paid me some money to help me tide over until the house sold. I never contested the divorce, and within 6 months our marriage was just a statistic on the UK divorce docket. At that moment, I wrote a letter, which I gave to my sister so that she would forward it to Jimmy. It didn't feel right to send a text message expressing my sadness and regret that I did this to him. He didn't deserve it. To my surprise, I received a response, although the address was not provided. He accepted my apology and apologized himself for putting me through the ordeal of tricking me into confessing to cheating. He also apologized for not being there when I needed him, and if it were possible to turn back time, he would have left the Riggs to be with me rather than leaving me when he knew I was depressed. He said he had to share some of the responsibility for what happened. This made me burst into tears, which was typical of Jimmy. I left Yorkshire, got a job in an estate agency in South London, and rented a flat in Greenwich. It was difficult to make such a drastic change, and I was close to giving up when I found the man I loved, and who now loves me just as much in return. I was asked to look at a house that the owner wanted to put on the market, and I met Jerry, a quiet man in his 40s. It was an exceptionally beautiful 4-bedroom detached house in Bexley that would fetch a pretty penny. The house was completely empty, and when we reached the master bedroom, he fell down and sobbed his heart out. I hugged him tightly, promising him that everything would be fine. It turned out that 6 months ago his wife died of cancer. He moved out, but knew that he needed to sell the house. and for the first time crossed the threshold of this house. Needless to say, love has blossomed. I am happy in my new marriage. I have an adopted son, although he is already 20. I was surprised when I received a message from Jimmy he had remarried in America and had a daughter, Amy. It hurt me that he now had something that I couldn't give him a child, but at the same time I was happy that he had something that he was previously ready to give up when he was married to me. He talked to his wife, Cassie, who agreed in principle for me to be Amy's godmother. Jimmy was in the UK and came to visit Jerry and me in Canterbury, near the cricket ground. Jerry's son went to university there, and we both loved the area, plus it was close to the coast, which we had already grown to love. When the doorbell rang, I trembled, not knowing what to expect. I was about to come face to face with my ex-husband for the first time since the day he left our home. I walked up to the door with Jerry. He kissed me and said that we would be fine. He held my hand tightly. I wanted to cry, but I knew that I shouldn't, because when I opened the door, I saw a tan Jimmy with a woman who looked at least 10 years younger than him, holding a small package named Amy. We took them into the house and began to get to know each other. Cassie was wary at first, but I think she quickly sensed that I was happy with my life, and within an hour we were like old friends. I knew Jimmy and Jerry wouldn't have any problems. They had similar personality traits, although as I became closer to Jerry as our relationship progressed, he was somewhere between Jimmy and Dan. For someone who didn't deserve a second chance, I promised to never, ever fail in my relationship. I went so far as to get a tattoo on my upper left thigh. It was a small scroll with the inscription, "Till death do us part." Above the top of the scroll was written Jerry, and just below it was written Jade. After lunch, I talked to Jimmy, thanked him, and apologized again. He smiled and said that in the end, everything worked out well for both of us. I couldn't have children, and Jimmy accepted that our relationship would be like that, and having Amy and meeting Cassie was a big plus. He asked me what happened with Dan, why I didn't continue that relationship. We didn't have a normal relationship, Jimmy. It was just sex on those Fridays, nothing more and nothing less. Neither of us cared the slightest about the other. After you left and he found out about it, he dropped me like a stone, not that I would come back. He liked the fact that I was married. I know that you were ready to get a divorce under the pretext that we were just growing apart, but I told everyone everything, although you already know about it from your sister. Rumors that he is a home wrecker with no moral principles have spread across local social media. When another woman told the same story as before COVID, his clientele dropped sharply and the club closed. After that, he simply disappeared. As I finished my sentence, I saw that Jimmy was distracted by something. For a moment, I remembered the day his eyes wandered away from me during that fateful video call, when he saw the reflection of his underwear in the mirror glass. But this was completely different. He went to the mantelpiece and picked up what he thought was a paperweight, but he, and only he except me, knew exactly what it was. By then Jerry had arrived. It's a strange decoration, but Jade said it's as important as her vase and important to us. She touches it every morning when she gets up and before we go to bed. She tells me that this is what will seal our love forever. But I still don't understand why anyone would put a cheap digital voice recorder into a block of clear acrylic to make a paperweight. Jimmy smiled and cast a sly glance at Jade, who was doing the same thing as him. This showed that she had learned her lesson. Never stop loving a good person, even for a second. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.